How do we design a future where sustainability isn't just a checkbox, but a lived experience embedded in culture, leadership, and our surroundings? Today, we're exploring how sustainability and human centered design intersect to shape a more resilient future with Peter Harrison, an award winning design strategist and sustainability leader. Peter has worked at the intersection of place and the human experience, diversity, equity, inclusion, and regenerative leadership, helping organizations go beyond surface level sustainability to drive lasting impact. Hey, Peter, welcome to Net Positive.
Thanks, Richard, for having me. Excited to be here and have a robust conversation with you.
I've been excited to even just prepare for this conversation together and brainstorm ideas. It's been exciting to have this conversation and connection. And I think we're discussing connection today.
That sort of shared energy between friends is hopefully what we'll be able to dive into. I'm excited to be here. So thank you.
Peter has spent his career shaping the way organizations think about sustainability, not just in terms of materials and certifications, but through leadership, culture, and that human connection. He believes that people are the golden thread in every strategy, and his work integrates DEI, mental well-being, and regenerative leadership, ensuring that sustainability isn't just about policies, but that it's about people, belonging, and impact. Based in Portland, you can find Peter out hiking in the Pacific Northwest, bringing the community together through good food and great local coffee, and is a fierce competitor on the pickleball court. In our conversation today, we're going to explore his career and how it's evolved from interiors to systems level impact, why sustainability is personal and why emotional intelligence matters, and how reimagining organizational change through next-gen leadership is just on the horizon. And Peter, sustainability is often seen as very technical, but at its core, it's really about people and culture. I'm curious, along the path and your arc of life here, what was the moment you knew that this was a path that you had to take? Was there an indicator? Was it an awakening? Was it a gradual feeling? Take me back to that time where you learned that sustainability, even at its core, was about people and culture.
Yeah, I think it's such a great question to sort of tee this conversation up. So for me, I sort of go back to my roots and my heritage is really about family and about conversation. So I grew up in a big family. I've got a really great good lots of siblings, all the things. And really for me, where a lot of my passion for impact and influence really comes is through honest to goodness, like conversations around the kitchen table. Well, I have a
Heart to
father
heart?
who, yeah, heart to heart. No, truly, a heart to heart. Like, let's have mashed potatoes and, chicken, and let's talk about climate change. Let's talk about democracy. Real big issues. My dad is a really great inspiration in that he really helped raise us in ways to be curious, to ask questions about big things, big topics in the world. And I think that that upbringing and that sort of conditioning really allowed me from a young age to be curious and to ask those questions. And oftentimes we would talk about things at dinner that were pretty interesting or not sort of culturally typical. So we talk about
Oh, I'm sure.
politics and relationships and just, yeah, issues like that. So for me, those are some of the defining conversations at 8 or 9 talking about sort of these big issues that I think really set
Foundational.
me, yeah, foundational, certainly.
And I'm sure that that's shaped the course of your career. Tell me more how this has shaped your course along the way.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think, that sort of curiosity, that willingness and wantingness to ask deep questions, to kind of be in the mess of it and have those collaborative conversations, for me, really kind of guided my journey throughout my childhood and then sort of going as I became an adult to really figure out how I can use what I love, which is people and connection and like heart to heart, like you were saying, to really
Mm.
find what I could potentially do professionally. That sort of led me to thinking about the built environment in a really interesting way from a more emotional or responsive kind of opportunity. And I can sort of share more a little bit about that. But
Mm.
that kind of led me on this path of, there are these big things that we can address, and so much of our experience is shaped by our physical space, and the way in which we understand ourselves is through all of that. And so how could I be a part of like positively designing and creating and including people in that process of space?
So let's talk just for a moment more about the areas of space. There's a lot of physical touch, high touch in interiors. This is where a lot of us humans reside and work in these kinds of spaces. So high function and high touch are involved in that direct human experience there, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's where I feel that there is a responsibility and almost a duty for when we're thinking about design to think about the impacts on our mental health and mental well-being,
Mm-hmm.
that there's really research behind the way that you create a space and the way you convey a feeling. It can be something as simple as like, does everyone in this space have an opportunity to sit and be comfortable? Does the
Mm-hmm.
space accommodate bodies of differing sizes? Does it accommodate different users, whether they have mobility or sight or their age? Like, there are so many ways in which space literally tells you you belong or you don't
Mm-hmm.
belong because of the design decisions and those design impacts.
Mm.
So I'm really passionate about that curiosity in the process of, understanding who are we designing for, and then also thinking about that engagement of them to co-create in the design process along with design professionals. I think that that's really important.
I think that would give you some keen awareness to not only how people use spaces, but I can also see that should give you some useful tools to translate into a sustainability strategy. Tell me a little more about what sparked your career shifts from interiors to towards sustainability strategy.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, when I started my career, I was working on a very large project. It's the Portland International Airport. So
Mm,
very amazing, sort
beautiful.
of beautiful project for the listeners at home or people who may not know. It's a new airport that just opened about 6 months ago. A beautiful mass timber project here in the Northwest in Portland. It's really a gateway to the region. So for me, what was so great about that project is I got to sit at the intersection of interior design and sustainability strategy. So I
Mm,
worked with the project team to really look at materials and look at healthy and sustainable materials. And what I take away from that project that was so wonderful was it really was about designing an airport and a passenger experience for health and human happiness,
mm,
which I think is such a great way to reframe what air travel and like, typically an airport experience is stressful. And so, you're trying to, but rather than just mitigate stress, we're trying to design for that optimal kind of human experience with the materials and what goes into the materials. So I did a lot of research on healthier materials and chemical composition and toxicology and all of that. Great research brain that I have. But really ultimately for the project was to be able to allow the airport to have, that passenger experience be elevated because of the material choices,
mm.
which to your point again is such a huge part of how we experience physical space.
I've seen it in pictures. I've not seen it in person, and I'm excited to experience the airport. And it takes a lot of work and a lot of partners to make that kind of thing happen.
Certainly. And when I say I worked on it, I say I worked on it along with 30,000 other partners and Oregonians who played a part in bringing that project to life. So it's certainly it's cool. It's cool to kind of be like, hey, I play just a small part of this bigger kind of symphony of a project that, is pretty breathtaking and pretty pivotal for our state and for the industry.
Tell me about another project, any other project along your path that's sort of helped shape your vision. I kind of want to know, like, where did you pick up experience along the way that has helped you refine, define, and refine your vision?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I sort of took this big project experience working on an airport, something I sort of never thought I would do when I was in college. But I then got to work on a really interesting strategy project, which for me was what led for some of that transition from more of a traditional kind of interior design background to more of a strategy role, really being a partner and a consult to an organization to understand sort of who they are, what they represent, and then how does that translate into space, to culture, to policy. So I got to work on a project with a sports facility, and what was great about this project is we worked with so many different stakeholders. So there was
Mm.
certainly the sort of steering committee that was part of the process. There
Mhm.
was membership engagement throughout the design process, designing and helping do surveys and a membership outreach event, and really getting to be a part of all of those conversations. What I sort of loved about the project was it really was about taking an institution and an idea of who they were and then shifting, adapting, and reframing that for who they wanted to be in the future. And just quite candidly, that organization was looking to shift from a sort of institutional old guard of older white, wealthy kind of individuals to a changing demographic that is younger, diverse, more sort of craving that social component as part of athletics. So it was a really great opportunity to kind of be that next generation perspective, part of the design team, but then really also part of the strategy team, shaping who they are, but also who they want it to be and how that can manifest in physical space. So to me, that was a really great project. And then I have another I can share a little bit about sort of belonging and community that's just really resonated with me in my journey.
Oh, please do.
Okay, we'll just do the three for three here. So the last project that I worked on that has been really such a key driver for me is the Marie Equity Center for LGBTQIA Community Health. This is a project that's like innately personal to me because it's part of my community and my sort of like identity of who I am. What was so great about this project is it was a sort of small and scrappy and very strategic project. We had a matter of like 6 weeks to help them go from a tiny two office space to a new 13,000 square foot first of its kind day center here in Portland, Oregon. The organization does frontline grassroots outreach and community health for LGBTQIA individuals, primarily focusing on helping unhoused and under resourced communities access care and access health care, really from a peer to peer support model. And so for me, it was really wonderful to work with this group, to work with both the clients that they serve, their community members, and take a space that was sad and drab and boring and white and plain and like the most hostile and like sterile of an environment to really change and help transform and co-create with them a space of joy with color and art and community. There was a wonderful community mural that we designed with the community, and everyone came together and co-created it and painted it together. And so for me, that just really solidified like my desire to be at that intersection of people and
Mhm.
who those communities are, and then helping bring them along in the design process and sort of making them central to that design rather than an afterthought, if that makes sense.
I think it's clarifying for me perfectly. What I'm realizing here too is that really your best function is helping facilitate these conversations of people, communities, needs and problems, areas of care, refuge, and healing, spectrum of human emotions in that space. It is virtual, it is psychological, it is emotional, it is physical, and tying it together. That's pretty
Yeah.
amazing.
Well, and I think Richard, you hit on something that like I for myself have gone through and struggled with sometimes in my like career arc is I have a lot of wonderful friends in the mental health space and who are therapists and who are, like you said, kind of sitting with people heart to heart, like helping them process and experience and express grief and overcome and like deal with the messiness of just like being a human in this human world that is like not kind to all of us. And so for me, I really take that sort of like almost therapeutic, but like coaching perspective
Mm.
in my role, but also just like who I am. Such a big empath, despite being kind of a very driven, and like I'm an Enneagram 3 for any Enneagram people out there, tending to kind of be a little bit more career focused. I have such this like soft spot in just who I am around humans and emotion. And I tend to really lead with that, sometimes to a fault.
I hear that.
Because I just feel like we're all people. We all feel things. We need to be able to feel our feelings. And really, that empathy piece is incredibly powerful when you give that to someone and you exchange that with someone. You allow them permission to be who they are, authentically, wholly, no apologies. I think that's just one of the best things in the world.
Well, I think it helps sort of shape people's value systems and what they hold true and dear to them, and what really activates their emotions and allows them to have emotions. I think I mean, my cup overruns with emotions at times, but just giving spaces for that kind of emotion to happen, whether it does or not, is most important there.
Yeah, and I think that that's such a great point that you hit on, that I think that permission to be human, to feel things, to not be a robot, to not be someone that exists in just you do it, like this productivity mindset, or this idea that you are just always going and doing and never giving space for yourself to tend to your needs and to tend to others' needs. I think that's an unfortunate conditioning of our society, and there are a lot of factors at play, and we could sort of go way down the rabbit hole. But I think just at face value, we every day can choose to show up for other people. We can choose to, when we're in a meeting, giving pause for like for me, one of the things I always love when someone's like, "How are you doing?" I'm like, I genuinely want to know how you're doing. I want to have you actually take space and reflect on that question and not give me a performance of I'm okay or I'm great. And so I oftentimes will do this thing, and maybe it's a little weird, but I'll be like, I'm a 7 out of 10 today, or I'm like a 4, and here's why. And giving that like tactility to like, I'm not just fine, I'm not just good, but I'm, here on a scale of, you know, 0 to 10 is helpful for me. So we're sort of getting into the meta part of it with the brain, but that's where my head goes.
That's my wife and my evening conversation. How hungry are you? Well,
Yeah.
I'm a 4. I'm 6. Okay, I get it.
How do
So
we meet
that
in the middle?
scale. hmm Well, and back to that tactile, that it is. I get that scale innately. I can check in with myself and my body there. Hey, I want to step into a bit of a different topic here and talk about navigating career growth and transitioning. You've had a lot of different transitions between design and consulting, now working leadership with purpose, which is amazing. But I'd like to talk about some of the challenges in making those career pivots. And then to reference what we were just talking about, like, how did how did Peter stay true to Peter while you are making those career pivots?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think for me, some of the experiences that I've gone through with pivots and change is really being okay as change is a constant. And as much as we as humans love predictability and we love like consistency and congruency, like change is always happening whether we want it to or not. Candidly, I have gone through some really intense burnout in my career. There was a point where I was so burnt out, I wanted to get fired from my job or laid off. I was like, if I get laid off or if I get fired, like the emotional distress will go away. Like I will somehow be given permission to like move forward in this world without this job. And honestly, that's we can kind of laugh at that. You're like, okay, that's a little like dark. Like maybe you don't
But
need
it's
to
a
get laid
real
off.
experience.
It's a real thing. And
It's
I
not
think
made up.
it's not made up. It's not made up. And I think that that's sort of where, to the point about career pivots, where I sort of had to name that. I had to name that my feelings were real, they were valid. B, I think this is also something in burnout that we don't talk about enough, that burnout is so much less about the individual's experience and more about structural and systematic conditioning in which has led to a person's feeling of burnout. So it is a culture in which overwork is praised, a culture in which always being always on is expected. It's a culture in which you're little praise and lots of criticism. So there are
But what?
conditions.
I was checking my work email.
Exactly. That we're like conditioned to feel like we always have to be doing and being, and I think that that's something that for myself I've had to get really clear. I am not a machine. There's this really great quote, and I can't remember. Quite honestly, it was like a TikTok or an Instagram thing that I saw, but the quote is, "Nothing in nature operates at 100% of the time. So why should
Mm,
I expect myself to?" That I just want to like pause for that,
that's
because
a good
that to
one.
me is like that rings so true. Like, why do I expect myself and others to operate like machines when nothing in nature, and we are all of nature, I believe that, operates at 100% of the time. So for me with my journey with burnout, I really had to sit with that. I had to sit with the fact that I was feeling burnout, the fact that my burnout is not necessarily a personal problem, that I can't put it on myself, that it exists within structural conditions. And luckily, I have a really good friend who's a therapist, and she's like, "Well, therapy is really great. Maybe you should go to
Mm-hmm.
therapy." And so I sort of started my journey into therapy, and that was really helpful. And candidly, I was able to build up the toolkit of the tools I needed with my emotional resilience to figure out that I did not have to suffer in silence anymore, that I could find a new job, I could quit, I could leverage the community that I have, I could have people around me help reflect back to me, "Hey, Peter, I noticed you're really good at X. I noticed you're really good at Y. Have you thought about this?" Having them collaborate with me with curiosity and compassion, that's what's helped me. And that's what I think helps others get out of those ruts and reframe those narratives and make those shifts. But it starts with like giving yourself space, giving yourself grace, and then bringing others along to help you in that journey. Um, that's just something that I've been working on and still working on, candidly.
Say the quote again.
Yeah, nothing in nature operates at 100% of the time. So why should we expect ourselves to?
And I'll tell you where my brain stormed as you said that, and maybe this is a whole rabbit hole.
I love it.
Is
Let's go down the rabbit hole together.
let's go down the rabbit hole together. I like sci-fi, and so a book I am rereading is Project Hail Mary with Andy Weir. There's some alien life form, and the human and the other life form are discussing where their sound frequencies overlap. The human's like, "Hey, I don't understand why we hear the same frequencies," and the alien knocks on the desk. He says, "Can you hear that?" He's like, "Yeah, I can hear that." He's like, "That's the sound of a predator coming. It sounds the same on your planet as it does on my planet. There might be some different frequencies there, but what the kind of the point that I'm making and what I just sort of realized is that nature is a minimum viable product.
Mm,
Is that that was the alien's explanation. The reason why you can hear what you can hear and not beyond that is you hear what you need to hear to survive, and that's where nature stopped. And so I think that this is bringing me kind of to this little mental epiphany here of
yeah.
I don't have to put in 100% all
No,
of
because
the
we've
time.
created that. We've created this culture of urgency. We've disrupted nature and said, "You will be productive, you will give, you will take." We've created this extractive kind of culture, and that's where for me that this idea of like energy, which is what you're talking about. Like nature is energy. Nature has seasons. There is a reason why plants don't bloom in the middle of winter, because they're
Mm-hmm,
freaking hibernating. They are
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
conserving their energy. And so I love that idea talking about just, yeah, like nature is it's letting us be what we need to be if we can listen to it and if we can be in tune with ourselves and not create all this added layering that we've added to the human experience that doesn't need to be there because it's fundamentally incongruent with who we are as natural creatures and beings.
And nature is immense failure at just enough success.
Yeah. Oh,
Just
exactly.
enough.
That failure is actually part of the way the iterative process of nature works. There is death, there is grief, there is loss, there is change, there is fire, there is yeah, all of it. We could sort of go on a bio mind hack realm here, but
Give me a little bit of hope for the future here. I'm a little trapped in my eco-anxiety, and I'd love to hear you and I are in different age categories. I'm really curious to look through your lens. You've been you're a leader. You've You've been president of IDA Oregon. Your next gen leader. Tell me what you see through your lens. As the sustainability landscape shifts, there's more conversation around regeneration, circularity. There's more daylight, literally and figuratively. What do you see out there?
Yeah, it's a great framing because I think that to build on our point earlier, there is such a call to action in terms of what needs to be done, what we can sort of not continue to accept as status quo anymore. I really get a lot of fire around that. I get a lot of fire around challenging what's been done, why we've always done it, and why do we always need to continue to do it. I think that that is a mindset that diminishes innovation, that diminishes like the deep collaborative process that we need to go through to
Mm-hmm.
solve the big problems. So I think there's sort of a little bit of a fire under my ass,
Mm-hmm.
if you will, in terms of wanting things to shape and change because they literally need to, because the climate doesn't have time for us to wait around. The climate doesn't have time for us to half step forward, three steps back. I think that there's just this sense of like growing up in a world for which the generations before, quite candidly, like didn't do what we needed to be done when we needed to do it. And so now it's sort of like, how do we fix this? But how do we also collaborate across generations and across movements? I think that that's what's inspiring to me, is that there's like a real sense of like what needs to be done, and let's do it, and let's roll up our sleeves, and we need to go beyond talk, and we need to really get into action. That congruency of values is really important.
Is
I don't
that
know if
what
that
keeps you moving? Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
kind
I
of
mean, it
follow up
keeps me
like that
moving.
momentum.
I think, candidly, it keeps me moving. It keeps me pissed off, if I'm just being really direct.
That's
Keeps me
the
pissed
fire.
off, but it keeps me passionate. No, it keeps me passionate. And I like that double. I like really holding to, I like duality. That concept is like something really important in my life. And so I do. I like that fire in my belly because it gets
Hmm.
me going every day and it keeps me questioning and curious. But I think there's a lot, and probably our listeners can pick up sort of from my tone, but I have a lot of like joy and optimism and sort of like brevity to how I am and how I talk about myself. So I don't take myself too seriously
Hmm.
because we can't move forward in this work together if we're all just all fire and no joy. I think you can
Right.
have both together.
I love that. Okay, I want to take our conversation in a new direction here. You've taught me about two real impactful phrases, and we're going to talk about both of them. The first is the idea and concept of a golden thread. And then the second I got out of your email signature around radical belonging. And so we're going to come back to that one.
Okay.
But I really am excited to talk about this idea of a golden thread because you made it personal to me. And if I can try to describe it for you, tell me how close
Yeah.
I'm getting,
No, go for
at
it.
least for me. And the concept I have is I always describe myself as a funky puzzle piece. I never
I love
always
it. I
like
love it.
I got a
Curved
lot of,
edges, nothing's, yeah, it's all great. Yeah.
but what you taught me about the golden thread is it's this tying bind that stitches them together that helps to create that narrative, to create that story, to create that connection around experiences, perspectives. We talked about energy earlier before, but how close am I in describing the golden thread? And tell me a little more about that human connection to create lasting impact here.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, and I think what I love about this concept of the golden thread, which you hit it nail on the head, by the way. It's yeah, the idea that there's these disparate or seemingly not connected, disjointed elements or ideas or whatever that are really actually interwoven by a somewhat seemingly invisible but really connective
Mm-hmm,
tissue,
mm-hmm,
or a back to the nature thing, kind of connective weaving. For me, it's like what I love about that idea is I think that there's sort of a personal application to it. And then I also think there's a systems application to it. So for me, it was in my career pivots and my career trajectory, it's how I tell my story. And I think too often we have limiting mindsets about who we are, what we can do, where we come from, what our sort of like framing of our professional background is. And I think it's really important for us to normalize, like, so many people make career changes, so many people make career pivots, and often, quite frankly, into totally different realms than they may have
Mm-hmm.
ever even started out from. So for me, it was honestly, it was a tangible exercise I had to go through of, hey, I've got this bachelor's of interior design, I've got this passion and project experience in sustainability. I've also got this super interesting intersection of strategy and
Mm-hmm.
people and
Mm-hmm.
facilitation and engagement. And so how do I learn to tell my own story about who I am, why the work I do matters, and why I create impact? That's where I've been able to literally sort of write things out and process, iterate, and create and collaborate to see where there's actually what might seem as disparate, but what's really connective. And for
Mm-hmm.
me, my golden thread is the people aspect, that it really
Mm-hmm.
is about people, that I love people, I want to help people, and that we're all connected in sort of a bigger way than we may see at face value. And then I think what's also great about that concept is I think that golden thread then can be taken from the people and can be applied to organizational cultures. So we
Mm-hmm.
can think about, how does this team work together? How does this team of disparate ideas or functions come together to create a unified mission, to create a unified project, to really espouse these shared organizational values of who we are and what we want to do. So I get really excited about like the personal, about the sort of personal
Mm-hmm.
connection, but then also about like this idea of a golden thread in an organization or a company or a workplace culture, and how you can amplify that at a bigger level. If again, if that's not a little bit too meta or sort of in the head about that idea.
Well, I'm in the head because I can see this as like the tie that binds,
Yeah.
that gathers us together. I can see that it's also a link through time. That it, for me, it kind of connects my professional background and personal background. So it sort of happens through time. It happens, you talked about invisibility. It happens between the electrons we're sharing here,
Yeah.
and our
Well, because I
human
think,
experience.
yeah, and that goes back to that energy piece. Like there is innate energy between disparate or disconnected elements or ideas. And so it's really about it's not even about seeing it, but it's about understanding and sort of having faith that that exists there,
Mm-hmm.
which I love that idea of energy. So
Me too. I want to belong so radically, and I want to learn more about radical belonging.
so the concept for radical belonging for me, and sort of how I like to think about, who I am and where I've come from, I've existed in really interesting different organizations and workplaces, and I've been in spaces where I felt unsafe, and I think we all have. I think we've been in spaces where you ask a question and the shame and the blame, you feel stupid, you feel that you're not a part of something, that it was dumb, that you should not have brought that idea forward, you feel that it's risk, which is inherent to all of us. It's like
Mm-hmm.
we're risk averse, we want to protect ourselves, but that the mere idea of putting yourself out there in a workplace setting is going to set you up for failure or for rejection. And I
Mm.
think that idea of, we are all hardwired for connection and community, and so when we threaten that, and I think so often we threaten that if leadership and those at sort of the leadership cohort of organizations create those spaces of unsafeness, I think
Mm-hmm.
you really sort of get the worst in the human condition. So for me, radical belonging really is, how am I as a leader? How do I show up with empathy every
Mm-hmm.
single day? And so
Mm-hmm.
that means when I'm, in a team meeting or a call and I ask someone how they're doing, I don't ask it performatively. I ask it
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
truly, wholly, and authentically. And I want to create that space for them to share, you know what? I've had a really shitty morning. I'm
Mm-hmm.
dealing with XYZ in my personal life. I'm
I'm a
dealing with
4 out
this,
of 10.
I'm on the floor. Like I'm on the floor
Mm-hmm.
today, and I want to
Mm-hmm.
name that, and I want to be okay with that. I want to allow myself to be a human who has feelings, who has emotions, who has experiences, who is a person outside of work, who is a person with relationships, with joys, with struggles. So for me, it's that permission to feel, and that question of how are you, and really asking questions, open-ended questions, being curious, not putting forth judgment. I think that's how you sort of start to inspire that safety, that permission, encouraging questions, being allowing for those questions. When we say no dumb questions matter, we actually model that behavior, and we don't shame
Mm-hmm.
and blame when someone asks something, or they throw out a different idea. And then for me, there's also this component of joy. And, I think too often we take so much in life too seriously. Even this conversation, I probably, you've heard me, I haven't laughed enough, but I think there's also an element of radical belonging, of leadership, that's not taking ourselves too seriously, and being willing to be human, to feel, to laugh with others, and to bring that brevity and that lightness to what we're doing. Because yes, while what we're doing is important, we're solving big problems and we're collaborating deeply, things will be okay. We can laugh.
Mm-hmm.
We can find moments for joy. We can be curious and be a little silly, be a puzzle piece with the rounded edges. We don't need to be perfect and tight and uptight.
Mm-hmm.
Bring joy. So for me, radical belonging is not so much a tangible thing, it's more of a mindset and a
Mm-hmm.
leadership perspective, because again, I think belonging is so powerful, and it's so imperative for us to create cultures of radical belonging. You know, it layers in, diverse perspectives, it layers in equitable experiences, it layers in a culture of inclusion. And really for me, it's just a framework of how I am and how I want to
Mm-hmm.
show up in the world. So I'm passionate about passionate about that as much as it's a concept there.
This is great. I'm really enjoying this conversation. So tell me, what's one small action? Let's let our listeners know, what's one small action? What's the next best step? That's what my wife and I talk about. What's the next best step we can do here? What's one key takeaway here that to help with organizational change and radical belonging, tying this all together with a golden thread?
Yeah, I have one. It will sound so like funny and minor maybe for listeners, but I feel it so strongly. So I'm gonna share it, Richard. And if people laugh, I'm okay with that. For me, I think one of the things is, when you are on vacation or you are taking time away from work or from volunteer or whatever is a primary thing that you spend your time with, don't check your email. Don't check your email, and tell others you don't check your email. It's something I got into the habit of doing about 3 years ago. I have a whole sort of out of office that I share, which I was going to read it because I'll give listeners a little bit of a heads up with what I share, but why I think it's so powerful and important. So my out of office that I always share. So I say, hi, I'm on PTO. I don't check email or Teams while I'm out, and I encourage you to do the same. By doing so, you will help foster a workplace that is people first, respects paid time off, promotes balance, and dismantles always on culture. If this is urgent, take a deep breath, because few things truly are. And then I give when I'll be back online.
Mm-hmm.
So it's such a minor thing, but that out of office means so much more in terms of who I am. I'm a person. I deserve rest. I deserve respite. I deserve permission to be human and to not be a machine. And I think it gives that kind of call to action for others to do the same, and to create those parameters where we respect people's time to disconnect, to be one, to be in nature, to be who we are as human beings. That's one little thing. It's such a little thing, but that little catalyst for change, I think, can send such a powerful signal in our work worlds. And so I'd encourage everyone to not check email when they're out, and find ways to set up that structure so that you really can be unplugged and you can be being a human in nature,
Mm-hmm.
doing what humans do.
Peter, I struggle with this. I think that what's so nice about that is the mindfulness of the action of typing it in. I mean, of course, the message is certainly the external view of that, but the internal practice there of just simply typing that in also
Yeah.
gives yourself some permission, because I am addicted to email and it
Yeah.
gives me that dopamine hit right in the morning.
Yeah.
And I am super guilty of checking in on, or even volunteering. I'll keep that going while
Yeah.
I'm away on this. So just giving yourself permission in that, I think, is
Yeah.
powerful.
I love that too, and I appreciate you sharing that, Richard, because I feel like that reflection back to oneself helps allow for that congruency of values. So it's one thing to sort of put it and to say it's on everyone else to respect what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's another thing to be like, actually, like I said, I would do this, and does this give me the permission to do what I need to do and be
Mm-hmm.
disconnected? So I love it because it kind of does both. It's about
Mm-hmm.
external and it's an internal marker. And I think that those are some of the most powerful little mechanisms for making change on a more broader level when all of us have those internal and external.
Any little gems before we move on to our next segment? Thoughts? Our conversation's going well.
No, no, I don't think I don't think I have anything else to add at this point. So
Okay, good. All right, so I want to introduce you to the community garden, and we had a little chat about this. You have heard of the rose thorn bud conversation before, right?
yes, I'm like such a fan of this exercise. So when I knew, no, literally, I'm like when I knew that this was part of the podcast, I was like, I want to do this podcast because I care
Good.
about. I love this. I love this framework. It's such a good because I think yeah. I'll let you tee it up because
How
it's
about
such a
you? Why
great
don't
yeah.
you tell me what it is since
No,
you
no.
know? All right, so the rose here is something, you're here in the Rose City. A rose is something that's really awesome and blossoming in your world, really fragrant. And then the thorn is a real sticky problem that you're having, like your friendly cactus. And bud is hope for the future that, given enough sunlight and warmth, will turn into something amazing. So, Peter, tell me what's really particularly fragrant in your garden these days.
Yeah, it's I think about a lot of things, and I to go back to the earlier stuff, I have a lot of passion, and I'm also pissed off about a lot of things. But for me, the positive, I really truly believe we're seeing work shift. We're seeing work shift for so many people. I think COVID, pandemic, racial awakening with the murder of George Floyd, climate change, political chaos and catastrophe and well all of the things, all of the rising globalization, all of those things have created such a almost perfect storm where it's no longer you can no longer separate I am a worker and I am a human, and those
Mm-hmm.
things fit in neat little boxes. So it's a little bit again more like broad picture thinking, but like I'm really excited about that. I think as
Mm-hmm.
someone that's like real passionate, like person who wants change to happen and positive change to happen at a quick pace. I'm excited about that because I think that work is just really shifting for a lot of people. And I think so many people are positively reframing and readapting work to be better suited for their lives, to be one of their pillars, but not their only pillar. And
Mm-hmm.
that really gives me a lot of hope. So I continue to be inspired by just work shifting for the better in more people's lives.
Well, the face of work has definitely shifted seismically in the last decade, half decade.
Yeah, it's changing and I think it's going to continue to change.
Mm-hmm.
Which, yeah, maybe kind of tease me up to what's been hard on my mind.
Yeah, tell me what kind of thorn problems, challenges, obstacles you're facing these days.
I it probably comes a bit from my generation, and I want to be careful. I'm speaking obviously as Peter Harrison. I don't speak on behalf of anyone that's my generation, but I struggle and I'm struggling with this resistance to change, this resistance to being okay with comfort because comfort is what we know and can predict. And so for me, where I get really angry or frustrated about is this inability to adapt when we need to adapt. We need to adapt or we'll die.
Mm-hmm.
Like both kind of at a meta level and then at like a real tangible level with climate change. So for me, that's my thorn is like we need to make some big changes, and the old systems, the old guard, the old sort of way of thinking about change, I just think is really broken. And I
Mm-hmm.
think we candidly need like a more willingness to acknowledge that it's broken and that we need to bring things forward at a much faster and more collaborative pace. So that's my thorn. It's really hard and it's really big and I can't change it alone, but I get mad about it.
Hey, well, we bring it up to help find community in this.
Yeah.
All right, so tell me what's giving you hope for the future?
Yeah, it's funny because it's kind of almost a little bit of both the thorn and the rose. We're talking about work, we're talking about it reframing into people's lives better. We're talking about the struggle with change and comfort. For me, I get excited because I see and I'm part of a generation that I think is just seeing, to your point earlier, so much change, remote work, flexible work, unionization in work, pay transparency, women in leadership, like these things that I felt like for so long, DE and I, that's a big one right now.
Mm-mm.
We're really seeing the rubber hit the road. We're seeing where those things are changing. We're seeing globally where, there's a right to disconnect law where literally your boss cannot email you. I think it's in France. They can't email
Mm.
you after hours. We're seeing 4-day work week, more of these trials around organizations doing a 4-day work week, how they're seeing sort of kind of enlarged benefits from a reduced workforce. So I don't know, candidly, if we're seeing as much in the US. We do have some things around pay transparency. Certain states are passing those laws. So I'm excited about that. But I'm excited about this bigger global shift that I think is centering more people in a more human first way as it relates to work. And I think to our discussions earlier, it's really these things are structural and we need structural guardrails in place from
Mm-mm.
governments, from organizations, from countries, from societies to make some of this change possible. Yes, it's human led and it's people led, and we're an integral part of the process, but we do need structure and we do need guardrails to protect us and to protect everyone else too. So I'm excited about some of those things that I think are coming, and I think we'll see more of them in the next 5 or so years. I'm excited about that. I think it's going to allow for more creative possibilities with how we are as humans and where we do work and how we do work and why we do work. I get really excited about those kind of things.
Mm. That's amazing. Okay, last question here in our garden. And it's actually about gardeners and sort of metaphorically, who has been helping to tend to your growth? People, any good podcasts you know of, um, that
Well,
have
this
been.
podcast certainly. This is like a reflective journey. So I'm growing myself from this discussion.
But seriously, though, I mean, we've definitely had people who have sort of lit our path along the way. So, a question here to you, Peter: who has helped you to grow and to flourish into this wonderful person you are?
Yeah. I so there's kind of a two-part there. I want to talk about sort of people that I've been able to be in community with, but then also people in community leaders or sort of like workplace leaders that I see really inspiring. I've done a lot of coaching, so I have a career coaching business that I've started, and I get to work a lot with students, and I get to work a lot with those sort of professionals who are sort of 5 years out from maybe a professional educational background to working in the world, and so I get really excited about helping them and being part of their kind of partner in figuring out their
Mm,
journey.
this is amazing.
And yeah, and it's like, and I think the first thing I always say is like, no one has it figured out. Like this idea
Right?
that
I'm sure they're
you
coming to you like, you two have.
well, totally. And I felt that way too. I'm like, you have these certain markers of things, and then you're just tossed in the world, and you're like, I'm supposed to like figure all this out without any guidance. And so I think just giving them a little bit of peace, giving them a little bit of safety. You don't have to have it all figured out. And in
Mm-hmm.
fact, the people who have it all figured out are usually just full of it.
Mm-hmm. We're all
So I
figuring
get
it out.
yeah, we're all figuring it out together. So I get a lot of really good energy from working with a lot of students and kind of emerging professionals,
Mm-hmm.
helping them figure out, just who they are, who they want to be, where's the way that they can contribute, excuse me, can contribute and be recognized for that and be rewarded and be paid fairly and equitably for their work. I think that that's really important. There's also another aspect where I really am inspired by people who are working in the dynamic landscape of leadership, of culture, of people.
Mm-hmm.
There's obviously like Brene Brown. She's sort of known by so many people. And your reference earlier, my email signature is the opposite of belonging is fitting in. And that's a Brene Brown quote. And that's something that I think about a lot. It's like how are we creating spaces of belonging, not just asking people to fit in? I'm really inspired by obviously Brene Brown. She's a pretty magnificent, amazing researcher and leader, and talks so much about vulnerability and the human emotions. There's also another author, Charles Duhigg. He has a really great book called Super Communicators. It is a book I'd recommend to anyone if you are curious about how to communicate, how to improve your communication. He talks a lot about what we've talked about, which is like matching and connecting energies, and just has some really great insight. And then another person that I'm really inspired by, her name's Ginny Clark. She's a conscious leader expert. She's worked in recruiting in HR and worked with some really amazing organizations. And she talks a lot about leadership from a conscious leadership perspective, and how do we show up at work? How do we manage and navigate our careers through pitfalls and through personal resilience? So she's a really great thought leader in this space, and someone I'd recommend people follow. Yeah, I'm inspired by my peers, by people around me and students, and then also just some really great people who are also shifting and challenging this idea of work and how to make work better and more human for more people.
Wow, Peter, these are great resources, connections, people to learn more from, and you're really creating such dynamic experiences for folks at work, at home, at play, in their lives, in their communities. And it's pretty fantastic to have folks like you really working to make sure that we have safe, comfortable, secure places to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's so foundational and fundamental that we have those feelings of connection, of community, of belonging, of the golden thread that we're all human. Human to heart connection is so important. Yeah, I continue to be inspired by that and continue to be excited about impact in ways that really center people at everything that we do. So yeah.
I have one final question for you if you've got time.
Okay. Yeah, go for it.
We are both here in the bounty of the beautiful Pacific Northwest. We mentioned that you're an avid hiker, and there's just so much beauty around here. Tell me about one of your favorite places in nature. It doesn't have to be
Yeah.
the Northwest, but where do you go to check in with yourself and check in with nature?
Yeah. I will say I am pretty biased living here in the Northwest because we have some pretty phenomenal nature. So I'm gonna give a two-part answer. I love the Columbia River or the Columbia Gorge here in the Portland area. Getting the ability to hike kind of from basically February to November every year and being out there is really great. I also grew up in a beautiful state. I grew up in Utah, and so every time I go home, I see the mountains, and I do feel a connection to the mountain in our Mountain West.
Mm-hmm.
And southern Utah is certainly very beautiful. So I think between my Utah roots and my Oregon place of home, I've got really great places to find myself centering and feeling my feelings and being at peace.
I understand that. I didn't know what mountains were. I grew up in the upstate of the southeast region and with the Blue Ridge Mountains, and did not know what mountains were until Mount Olympus,
Oh,
Mount
okay, yeah.
Hood, Mount Rainier, Mount Big Lake, all of these around here, but didn't understand what a mountain really was. They're
Yeah.
quite picturesque.
Yeah, they're quite powerful and impactful, and
Hmm.
also just help us remind who we are in the grand scheme of everything.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's really powerful.
Wow, this has been a fantastic conversation, Peter. I've really enjoyed it. We've talked about so many different things, but particularly resiliency, how it shows up for yourself, how it shows up in leadership, how to bring in the full human spectrum of emotions, how to really have self-awareness and awareness of so many people around us in our communities and in the places and spaces that we create. So thank you so much for sharing so many great little gems of insight and helping us to see through your lens there.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. It was an honor and a privilege to be in this space together with you and have this conversation. So thank you again for having me on your show.
You're really giving us case in point that big changes start small. It's not only the tagline for the podcast, but it keeps ringing true, and you show up with that every day, and I appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate you too.
Okay. Well, we'll see you all back on our next episode. Peter, I hope you'll come back again. Thank you so much for sharing, and we'll see you all again soon.